Om Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapah Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Takshinam Mukham Te Namam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we begin today on verse number 137. So these two verses, 37 and 38, the teacher will answer the disciple's question, what is bondage? You might remember earlier in the book, the student put a number of questions to the teacher. And in the course of the teaching, one by one, the teacher is answering those questions. And as you can see, although I'm saying the answer is provided in these next two verses, all the verses that we studied prior to this was providing the context for this. So although the question would be, why didn't the teachers give these two verse answers right in the beginning? Why wait so long? And the reason is, to give this answer, a certain context needs to be provided. And so all of the verses we have seen in the past 2 or 3 weeks really are included in that answer to what is bondage. Let's look at verse 137. Atra anatmani ahamiti Matir bandha eshosya pumsaha prapto vajnanat janana marana klesha sampata hetuhu yenaivayam vapuridamasat satyamityatma buddhya pushyatyukshatyavati vishayais tantubhiv koshakritvat. Identifying with the non-self as I is bondage. This is caused by ignorance, and it immerses a person in the suffering caused by birth and death. Seeing this perishable body as I, and therefore real, the person nourishes it, bathes it, protects it with sense objects, and gets trapped like a caterpillar in its cocoon. It's pretty straightforward and clear, but we can go piece by piece. Identifying with the non-self as I is bondage. So one of the basic premises of Vedanta is that we are seeing something which is not there. In Sanskrit, they call it atasmin tadbuddhihi. And this happens by a process called superimposition. And the classic example which we see almost every week now of how we mistake a rope for a snake. So we are seeing a snake where there is no snake. Exactly in the same way, we are seeing the self where there is no self. So when I say myself and I point to this body, I'm just saying this is me. My I, myself is here. But just as I am mistaking a rope for a snake, I'm really mistaking this body, mistaking the Atman to be this body. That's why I said this is, because the real self is the Atman, but I'm not seeing Atman. And most of the time we are not even aware of the Atman. All that we are seeing is our body and mind. And therefore, seeing the body where the Atman is like seeing the snake where the rope is. And that is why he says, identifying with the non-self, that is the body and mind, as I, that is bondage. And this will be described again in the succeeding verses also. Why is it a bondage? Because when the self remains as the self, it is free. That's his nature. The Atman is free, it's infinite, it's immortal, and perfect in every way. Now, at present we are saying, this is me, this is the self, not infinite, by means not free. We think we are free, but we know that our freedoms are pretty limited. In many respects, we are not free at all. So not free, none of the qualities associated with freedom and with infinity are with us now. And that limiting of ourselves causes a host of problems which will be described in succeeding verses. And that's why it's bondage. And again, an example that we keep coming to often is even in our present state, when we are not enlightened, in deep sleep, when most of the present limitations seem to be suspended, even for a short time, we already feel a sense of freedom, at least from the kind of afflictions and stress and anxiety and worries and fears that we have right now. All of them are absent, even with this little bit of a temporary release from identifying with the body and mind, even when we are in ignorance. So think about how much more freedom and joy we will experience when this freedom from the body and mind clinging will go permanently, not temporarily, as in deep sleep, and not covered with ignorance. It's just filled with bliss and knowledge. And because of that, at present, our state is a state of bondage. So one of the important basic practices or basic requirements for the study of Vedanta, which we saw earlier, was that those 4 basic practices. The 4th was intense longing for freedom, mumukshutva, which is very important if Vedanta does not have to remain merely as an academic, intellectual pursuit. If it has to have a life-transforming effect, then this 4th thing, that mumukshutva, longing for freedom, is absolutely important. The problem is, if I think I'm already free now, then why will I need to have any longing for freedom? Because I'm already free. So that is what Maya can do. We can be in bondage, but we will not even know that we are in bondage. We will have this kind of illusory sense of freedom. And because of that, we will feel a longing for freedom is pointless. And therefore this statement, identifying with the non-self as I is bondage, wouldn't make much sense, because how many of us feel at present that we are bound? The more superficial our lives are, many of us, especially those of us staying in a kind of the part of the world which enjoys much more freedoms than some other parts in the world. In fact, oftentimes in the Western world is often described as the free world. Now, at that kind of a superficial relative level, of course we have much more freedom here. But if you go deep down, that's why looking deeply, if we look deeply, then we will see that now there's a lot of respects we are not really free. And then only this statement will make sense. So this is caused by ignorance, and it immerses a person in the suffering caused by birth and death. This chain reaction is repeated again and again throughout this book. Ignorance leads to a sense of unfulfillment. Because if I'm infinite and pure and free, and I become ignorant of that fact, that means I no longer know that I'm infinite, pure, and free. If I no longer know that, that means I've begun to think of myself as a finite, bound, vulnerable, mortal creature. Now that kind of an identity is going to be unfulfilling because I have limited myself, and because of this kind of a vague sort of a memory or this longing for infinitude it's like the kind of longing a poor person might have to become a millionaire. Why do people engage in pursuit of wealth? In order to long to earn more money, I must be aware now, at present, I have very little. And only when I know that I have little, I would want more. So that's what has happened. In reality, I'm the infinite. I lack nothing. I'm completely self-fulfilled being, the only being in this existence. But now I have limited myself because I have become ignorant. I have become small. And therefore, I feel I need more now. I'm unfulfilled. So that desire is the first thing that occurs after that ignorance. And once there is desire is what leads to action. If you have a desire for a cup of tea, and if that desire is intense, then you will go, you get up and fix yourself a cup of tea. So desire will lead to action. And if that cup of tea makes you happy, then that karma has led to its results, happiness. Some of the karma will lead to sorrow. And so happiness and sorrow, that is the story of our life. We go from, sometime we are happy, then there is pain, then we are happy again, then there is pain and suffering again. And that's how we get into this vicious cycle of samsara, relative existence. That's called samsara chakra. And that is why it said the suffering caused by birth and death. So it's not simply birth and death, it's also what happened between birth and death. Most of us don't remember how much pain, if any, we had when we were born. We were just little babies then. But we can see at least the mother, there's a labor pain, so the mother definitely experiences pain, along with joy, of course. And death. We don't know exactly death itself, how painful it is, but at least the moments and days and weeks leading to death, in many cases we have seen in other people, it could be very painful. And so therefore, when it says the pain of birth and death, we should also include in that what happens between birth and death. Seeing this perishable body as I and therefore real, and because it is me, we nourish it, we bathe it, we protect it, we take care of it in every way and get trapped. And the example given here is of a caterpillar in a cocoon. Verse 138. Atasmin tad buddhihi prabhavati vimudhasya tamasap viveka abhavat vai spurati bhujage rajjudhishana tato anarthavrato nipatati samadaaturadhikaha tato yo asadgrahaha sahi bhavati bandha shrunu sakhe. Due to ignorance, the deluded sees a thing that is not there. This is what I was referring to earlier. Atasmin tad buddhihi. Seeing things that are not there. The absence of discernment, the absence of viveka, leads to seeing a rope instead of a snake. And one who grasps it experiences great suffering. Think about the other way. It's not necessary always that we should always mistake the rope for a snake. You could mistake the snake for a rope, which could be instant pain. You think, oh, just a piece of rope, and you pick it, and it happens to be some poisonous snake. And then you can see you grasping experiences great suffering instantly. Listen, this kind of taking one thing for another, my friend, is itself bondage. And we see this happening at various levels in our lives. It's not just about rope and snake. Sometimes we misjudge other people. So what the person is, we may not know. And we may superimpose our own biases or prejudices on someone else. And so that also is possible. So it's a big subject about, you can call it the psychology of error. Why does any misperception occur? In fact, I wrote a blog about it recently. So if you want to take a look at it, go to the center's website and go to the blog section, and you'll find, in fact, it I think landed just this morning. So I'll briefly summarize that. Why we see a snake instead of the rope. Why do we even make that mistake? From where does that snake come? Now, some great thinkers have put a lot of thought into this. Why do we make mistakes? Why does misperception occur? In Sanskrit, they call it bhranti. Bhranti darshanam. Bhranti means a delusion. Why do we get deluded? And so among the different theories that are put forward, there is one by, in the Buddhist circles, those who subscribe to the theory of emptiness, Shunyavada it is called. Now, a lot of these theories are very nuanced, and the objections to these are nuanced as well. We don't have time for that, but this is a very short and brief summary. So according to emptiness, theory of emptiness, everything is empty. In other words, there is no such thing as a substance or an essence to anything. Nothing. That's the thing. So what, according to that theory, they say that we are really seeing a non-existing snake in place of a non-existing rope because there is really nothing. And the objection sometimes raised to that is, if it is possible to see non-existing things, then we don't see every non-existing thing. And one example is, for instance, a square circle. A square circle is non-existing. Nobody has ever seen a square circle. But if everything is empty, and it's possible to see non-existing things like this snake and the rope, then why don't we see a non-existing thing like a square circle? That's the kind of a critique other people offer to that way of thinking. Another theory is called Atmakhyati. And this is by another school in Buddhist circles, and that is called Kshanika Vijnanavada, which means the theory of momentary awareness or momentary knowledge. Now, according to this way of thinking, what we are seeing is not, there is nothing outside of us. Everything is in the mind. So we are seeing the snake in our mind in place of the rope. the mind is constantly changing. Every moment, things are changing. And therefore, it's a momentary snake seen in place of a momentary rope in this momentary mind. Everything lasts only for a moment. That's the worldview is based on that way of thinking. And of course, the critique to this is we keep on seeing the snake until we know it's a rope. The snake that we see is no longer kind of just a momentary thing. It just seems to last much longer than a moment. The third theory is called Anyatra Khyati. There are two schools of philosophy called Nyaya and Vaisheshika. And what they say is that what we are really seeing, the snake that we are seeing, is not in front, but it's someplace else, maybe in an anthill, for instance. So the delusion is that a snake which is in some other place, I'm seeing it as if it is in front of me. And an objection raised to this theory is that if I could see the snake, let's say, which is in the next room in front of me, then I should be able to see other things in that next room as well, not simply the snake. Yet another theory is called Anyatha Khyati, which means seeing what is different. And this is by a kind of a neo-Nyaya school of thinking. What they say is that we are seeing the rope, but we get the knowledge that it is a snake. So we are seeing differently. There's some defective in the eye, so we are not seeing things as they are. And of course, one other defect is clearly the semi-darkness in the room. The problem with that is that there is no relationship, no relation between the knowledge and the object of that knowledge. In other words, if I'm seeing a rope, I cannot have the knowledge that I'm seeing a snake. There has to be a match between knowledge and the object of knowledge. I will think this is a snake only if I'm seeing a snake. And therefore, that's the kind of an objection raised to this way of thinking. Sankhya is another school. They believe, that's their way, their theory is sometimes called Akhyati. They believe that what's really happening is a fusion, a combination of seeing and remembering. That I'm seeing the snake and I'm remembering, I'm seeing the rope, but I'm remembering a snake that I had seen earlier. I've read about it, I knew about it, and so on. So the perception of the rope and the memory of a snake, they somehow get mixed up. They get fused due to this inborn fear in my heart. And that is how then I mistakenly say, oh, here is a snake in front of me. The objection raised to this is that it cannot be the memory of a snake, because we don't run out of fear just by remembering a snake. If I'm afraid of snake and run away from that because I'm seeing the snake in front of me. And the second objection they sometimes raise is that from the same thought wave, the vritti of the mind, you cannot have two distinct experiences. Here they are really saying the experience of seeing the rope and the experience of remembering the snake. These two distinct experiences cannot occur through just one perception, one act of seeing. And so, as I said, there are a lot of nuances involved. So, both in the theories and in the objections raised to them. And finally, most schools of Vedanta, they have the theory that is called Anirvachaniya Khyati. What they are saying is, we are seeing a snake, no doubt. That's why we have the knowledge that I'm seeing a snake. Now, in order to get the knowledge that this is a snake, it doesn't have to be real. Sometimes a toy snake Also, if I don't know it's a toy, I will think it's a snake, but it's not really a snake. It could be just any material. So in order to get the knowledge that I'm seeing a snake, the snake doesn't have to be real. But what in Vedanta they say is, when I'm mistaking a rope for a snake, I'm really seeing a snake there. So the knowledge that I'm seeing a snake is because I'm seeing a snake at that time. So the snake is as if it's real. Now, of course, we switch on the light and the snake disappears. And I find a rope in its place. And therefore, we know by that the snake was not real. So what is the status of the snake? I cannot say it's unreal, because an unreal snake would not have created fear in my heart. So it was real until I knew it was unreal. So they have a third category in Vedanta for this, that something which is not real, something which is not unreal, but is apparently real. Apparently real means it feels as if it is real, although it is really it's really unreal, but feels as if it is real. So that is the status. And that's why they call it anirvachaniya, means inexpressible, because, and they give several possibilities. You can't say it's real, you can't say it's unreal, you cannot say it is real and unreal at the same time, you cannot say it is not real and not unreal at the same time. And so you are left just with one option and say, I think I cannot say what it is. And therefore they call it the inexpressible. Now again, as I keep on saying, it's not just about the snake. So when we apply this example, Maya, the cosmic ignorance, is like the snake. Maya is inexpressible. We cannot say Maya is real. We cannot say Maya is unreal. Maya is there as long as we see it is there. Dream, the dream world, inexpressible. When you are in the dream, it feels as if it's real. When you wake up, no longer real. And therefore, the word that they used in Vedanta for such entities is mithya, means kind of a fake reality, if you like. Nowadays, people say about fake news, news and fake news, reality and fake reality. So a snake is like a fake reality. Now apply it to ourselves. Okay, one other thing, keep in mind. Why do we keep on saying the room is semi-darkness or semi-lit room? And as I pointed out earlier, if the room is like totally dark, you won't mistake anything for anything, because you won't even see the rope. So you can't mistake it for a snake. So we need a little bit of light. You don't need too much light. If you have full light, then you will see the rope as a rope. You just need kind of enough light to know something is there, but not enough light to know what that something is. In other words, a partial light or a partial darkness covers the rope partially. Now, what does it mean, covering a rope partially? What it means is that it reveals only the general characteristic of the rope. And a general characteristic of anything is this thing, this object. So, in that semi-lit room, what is revealed is there is something here. What is hidden by that partial darkness is what that something is. So the general characteristic, this object, is revealed. the special characteristic, the identity of that object as rope, that is hidden. And that is only in such circumstances superimposition is possible. So keep that in mind. General characteristics are revealed. Special characteristics are hidden. So it's always a partial covering. It's never a total covering. Now, exactly in the same way, when we say that Maya or ignorance covers this infinite reality, Brahman, it doesn't cover it totally. The Maya's covering over Brahman is only partial. Now, if it is partial, which is the general characteristic of Brahman that it reveals or does not hide? And that is existence. Sat. You see the Satchitananda, the first thing, Sat, is existence. That is revealed. That is not hidden. And because it is not hidden, every one of us, we know I exist. If that were hidden as well, we wouldn't even know that we exist. But because it is not hidden, we are already kind of partially enlightened. So the awareness that we have that I exist, that's true knowledge. There is no delusion there. That's reality. My existence is very real. There is no superimposition there. But the special characteristics, the specific identities, is hidden. And here, in the case of Brahman, the other two characteristics called Chit or consciousness and Anantam, infinity. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, there is this passage, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. So Satyam is Sat, Jnanam is Chit, Anantam is infinity. So these two characteristics, awareness and infinity, they are hidden because of the covering of Maya. Which is why we don't feel we are infinite. At present, the extent of our expanse is really, the limitations are, I am as big as my body is, and as far my thinking goes, as far back, as far out as my mind can take me. That's the limit. We are not infinite. And of awareness, each of us feels we have awareness, of course. It's with the help of awareness that all knowledge comes. Only because I'm aware of this object in front of me, I know that they are there. But the difference is this. Right now, we all feel we have awareness. How many of us know that we are awareness? That's a very different thing. To have awareness and to be awareness. And those things are hidden. Once we know that I am awareness itself, we are already illumined, we are already enlightened. Because awareness is never extinguished. Everything else goes away. When we fall asleep, the body becomes almost non-functional. When we go into deep sleep, both body and mind almost go non-functional. But through all these three states, awareness always remains. We have awareness right now. That is why sound and sights and everything, we have access to them. We know what's going on around us. There is awareness in our dream. That is why we know what is happening in our dream world. That is how next morning if we have a good memory, we are able to say, oh, last night, this is what I dreamt. there is awareness present even in deep sleep. Although there is nothing there to experience in deep sleep, to experience that nothingness, we need to be aware of that nothingness. So the only entity that is never extinguished, that never becomes non-functional, that is always awake, that is awareness. That is who every one of us is. The body will fall ill, the body will die. The mind will have its ups and downs. The mind will be sometimes happy, sometimes miserable. Consciousness, awareness is always present. But because of ignorance, as this verse says, the deluded see a thing that is not there. So we, instead of seeing, if we saw things exactly as they were, then our self-identity would be, I exist, I'm the infinite one, I'm awareness itself. Not that I have knowledge, I am knowledge. But now, we are partially hidden. Our own identity is hidden from us. So the only thing we know is, only thing right, correct thing that we know is, I exist. Where the delusion comes in is, now, I exist as a human being. I exist as this mortal, limited, vulnerable creature. I exist as a person with fears, hopes, joys, and so on. All the characteristics of the body and mind have become my characteristics. And the characteristics of Brahman, which are my true characteristics, are hidden from me. And that is why, just as the rope is mistaken for a snake, the divine being is mistaken for a human being. The infinite, perfect Atman is mistaken for this finite, mortal creature. And Maya itself is mistaken to be this kind of an inexorable, terrible nightmare which we can never get out of. Now, all of these things problem can be solved simply by looking deeply. Simply by switching on the light. For the rope and snake, we need to switch on the external light. In the case of our self-identity, you need to switch on the internal light, and that is the light of awareness. So when I'm able to, and that's why we cannot be lazy. And I'm not just speaking about physical laziness. It's also psychological laziness. By psychological laziness, I mean we have grown up with a certain worldview, certain understanding about ourselves, about the world in which we live, our place in this world, and so on. And this kind of an understanding has developed in our heart as a result of several influences we have had throughout our life. And because we have had different experiences, our worldviews may not be exactly identical. But we are creatures of that worldview. And by psychological laziness, I mean, because this is the worldview we are familiar with, even though it may not be a perfect experience, even though we may have a lot of questions and doubts about it, but it's at least something we know. Now, when we read books like this text that we are studying now, it may present some ideas which may not already be a part of our worldview, which may require of us to think about ourselves differently, to think about the world differently, to think about the purpose of life differently. Now, making that change can be very difficult. So what most people end up doing is they don't necessarily change, but they kind of create a different compartment in their head and say, oh, I love non-duality, I love Advaita, I love Vedanta. And so we get kind of an intellectual stimulation or kind of an intellectual kick out of it because, these are fascinating ideas. But they remain in some corner of our head because we enjoy thinking of it that way. But that does not influence the rest of our life. Well, maybe even if there is because sometimes what we believe intellectually may have some effect on us, but that's very marginal. To bring about, to have that idea which our head resonates with, bring about a greater transformation of our life, would need letting go of some of our ways of thinking, which may have been very great support to us up to our life, up to this point. The ways of thinking with which we are comfortable, and so letting go of that can be very difficult. So it's easier to appreciate a new idea, but it's difficult to let go of an existing idea if we have lived with it for a long time. And that is where actually, when Upanishads, they speak about Shraddha or faith comes in, that is where that faith comes in. As they say that, I forget the exact way it's expressed, it's like a known devil is better than an unknown friend or something like that. So even if, let's say sometimes it happens, it's like, just to give one example, suppose you have someone working and you have employed a person and to do some task for you. You're not happy with that person, but that person has worked for you for a long time. And so although you're not fully satisfied with it, you're just kind of carrying on with that person as your employee. Now, someone else comes and says, this is a really much better person than the one you already have. Why don't you fire this person and get hire this new person? Now, a person who is in charge of hiring and firing, that person needs to have some faith in this new hire is going to be better than the person I have. Or some people just lack that kind of a courage. And so they say, or who knows, maybe the next person might be worse than this one. I might have a greater trouble. So at least I know this person for a long time, and even if it's not fully satisfactory, it's better to have this known unsatisfactory entity than some person I don't know anything about. Now, again, as I said, this is a kind of a very crude and simplistic example, but that's essentially what I'm speaking about. So some of the ideas that we have now may not be perfect, but we have lived with them for a long time. And now suddenly saying, you're not the body, you're not the mind, you are this consciousness. It's like, oh, it's a very fascinating idea. But in order for me to live with this idea, my earlier ideas I have left to let go. And that's difficult. And that's what I meant by psychological laziness. And that's why the word that is often used in the Vedanta text for a daring spiritual seeker is dhira. The word dhira is often translated as a brave one or a courageous one. And we need tremendous courage in spiritual life. Sometimes it might seem, well, all that you're doing is just sitting quietly with closed eyes and meditating and just reading these texts like this. There's a lot more courage involved in doing other things in life. Sure, there's no denying to go on a battlefront and face the enemy. Yes, that's one kind of courage. But if we think that sitting quietly, peacefully, looking deeply in our heart as a kind of a passive activity, we are totally mistaken. I would go to the extent of saying that meditating can be an intensely active, courageous activity. Because there we are trying to do something which doesn't come naturally. Naturally, the mind wants to go out. Naturally, the senses want to go out. And a meditator says, nope, I won't allow you to get out. I want you to just go and focus in your heart. That's going completely opposite to the way most of us have lived and thought throughout our life. And someone who can do this day after day after day with faith, with hope, with this dogged determination, I think that's an extremely courageous act. And so therefore, one statement that Swami Vivekananda was very fond of repeating from the Upanishads was the Nayam Atma Balahinena Labhyaha. This Atman cannot be reached by weak people. And he was not simply speaking about physically weak, in fact, mentally weak. And so we have to be strong, we have to be courageous, we have to be bold, and we cannot afford to be lazy, we cannot afford to be lethargic. Only then will we understand what is meant here by saying this kind of taking one thing for another, my friend, is itself bondage. So these two verses, 137 and 138, they summarize the answer to the disciples' question, what is bondage? And bondage is caused, as we saw, by mistaking this one thing for another. Okay, so we will stop here today. If you have any thoughts, ideas, questions, comments, feel free to ask.
Hari Om Swamiji. Swamiji, you give an example of a light turning on when we achieve awareness. Is there any incremental progress we can make to achieving awareness, or is it sudden, all or none?
Well, yeah, good question. Yes, I mean, we can think about incremental in the sense that the signs that the light is going to get switched on can appear even before the light is fully switched on. And Sri Ramakrishna gives the example of the eastern horizon just before the sun rises. So even before we are able to see the sun peep over the horizon, we already see the eastern sky becoming orange, kind of a reddish hue, and we know that the sun is about to rise. Similarly, that light to go within our heart, even before that light goes on, the signs of that light coming up, just like the sign of the eastern horizon before the sunrise, we are able to see that. And we are able to feel that within our own heart. And you will see, I mean, sometimes we get glimpses of it. On the days or a series of days, let's say you have had good meditation, or when you pray, you are able to pray with your whole heart, without any distractions, you just feel a bit uplifted. You feel that the eastern horizon is becoming illumined a little bit. Unfortunately, in our case, usually what happens is it's not a very steady progress. So we just kind of feel we are advancing, and then again, due to samskaras, due to habits, we just kind of fall off the grid a little bit, and then we come. So in the beginning, the progress kind of seems, it's our progress can be, if you want to chart it out, it might appear like kind of a wavy line. There are things seem to go well in our spiritual practices, then we kind of go down a little bit and then go down. And so this kind of a wavy movement. But as we progress in spiritual life, we will see that the crests of those waves will remain for a longer time. And then there is a dip for a short, then again there is a crest. And eventually, it'll be a straight line. Now, I think in medicine, if you have a monitor, your heart is connected, you want those things to move. A straight line would mean a person is dead. But here it's opposite. The ups and downs will become less, and there is kind of a steadiness of kind of a persisting of that higher level will remain longer and longer when we make progress. Yeah.
Swamiji. Swamiji, how can something infinite be covered?
Good question. And the answer is, no, it cannot be covered. And then you say, well, we are all talking about covering. So when something which is infinite cannot be covered, we can say that it cannot be covered really. Can it be covered unreally? What do you think? No? I think yes. Because covering it unreally means not covering it. I mean, it's like, is it possible to, I mean, it's like this. Is it possible for me to instantly now go to the Bahamas in a moment? No. But I can fall asleep and instantly dream and find myself in the Bahamas. Now, it was impossible for me to be in the Bahamas instantly, and yet the dream made it possible. Now, made it possible in the sense, I've not really gone to Bahamas, but at least I could have that illusion of going to the Bahamas, right? In the same way, the infinite cannot be covered. But due to illusion, can I feel that the infinite is covered? And illusion, there are no rules for an illusion. And so, yes, go. Ashish, yeah.
Illusion itself cannot exist, right? If infinity is what...
Come closer, yeah.
Swamiji, illusion itself cannot exist, right? Because...
Absolutely. And therefore, the illusion is as much inexpressible as the covering of Brahman. And therefore, you cannot say the illusion exists for all the reference reasons that we have, that Brahman alone exists and illusion is not real. At the same time, can we deny that we are in it right now? So we are experiencing it, just like we are experiencing the snake. So we cannot deny it's real, but we cannot deny it's unreal either. So it's neither real nor unreal. And yeah, and so therefore the word mithya is used. Right now, our experience of, we experience ignorance because ignorance appears as real to us. When we wake up, then it will have vanished. Therefore, we say if it has vanished, then it was not real to begin with, like a dream. And so, just as the dream is real as long as it lasts, the ignorance is real as long as it lasts. I mean, the dream itself is a form of ignorance. Ignorance of the waking world is really the dream world. Yeah. Yeah.
Namaskar, Swamiji. In the 1,000 names of the Divine Mother, we say we worship the one who deludes us. In other words, Divine Mother is part of this Maya, and the Maya, Ramakrishna, I suppose, is part, for us at least, part of this Maya, and yet we worship Ramakrishna and the Divine Mother who has deluded us. Could you comment on, I suppose, positive Maya, if you will, and the role of worshipping form in order to awaken?
Well, yes, as you yourself answered the question really, through positive Maya, the word Sri Ramakrishna uses is Vidya Maya. So, if a certain form or a certain way of doing things can take me out of that delusion, then that is fine to do it. So, the ultimate reality may be beyond form and formlessness. But if a way of holding on to a certain form, and that will take me beyond that bondage of forms and names, then I should make use of that. In fact, think about it this way. Although we are saying the body and mind is not our true identity, but that's all that we have right now. So even in order to know that we are not the body and mind, we are using the body and mind. I mean, when you're to meditate, you're sitting in a certain way, your diet, exercise, all of these things we are doing. So using the instrumentality of body and mind to eventually understand that we are not the body and mind. So the mind is a bondage. The mind is not who we are. But it's with the help of the mind or the instrumentality of the mind that we go beyond the mind. And so these are these two apparently contradictory statements in the Upanishads. The Upanishads say that the ultimate reality is beyond the reach of the mind and the senses. The Upanishad also says that ultimate reality can be known only with the help of the mind. And so Shankaracharya in his commentary, he says, what kind of a mind? And so he said, Su samskrutena manasa, the mind which is refined, the mind which is disciplined, it's that mind that will help us go beyond the mind. And hence, a lot of the spiritual practices that we do is primarily for the refinement of the mind. And refinement of the mind means really a mind which is not deluded, a mind which can see things clearly. That's why the importance of discernment, importance of detachment, importance of all these other qualities necessary. All of these things, what it will do is, it will purify the mind, make the mind clear. And that is why Sri Ramakrishna said, a pure mind, a pure buddhi, and pure Atman are one and the same. So when the mind can become so pure, keep on purifying it, refining it, refining it, refining it to the point, ultimately, all the materiality from it will be washed away, so to speak, and it will be indistinguishable from the reality which is pointing to. So, worshipping the Divine Mother, praying to Divine Mother, can be a very helpful aid to go beyond all names and forms. In Ramakrishna's case, we see that when he was doing his was his teacher, Vedanta teacher, Totapuri, came. And so that teacher wanted to show him the truth, that ultimate reality beyond all names and forms. And Ramakrishna said that he had no difficulty whatsoever withdrawing his mind from all material forms. He has this complete detachment. What he was attached to was the form of Mother Kali. So he said he could let go of all of the forms. Only this one form, just such an object of his love and adoration. And he said that was something he just couldn't do it. And then he explains that how much courage he needed to kind of let go of this one form that he had held on to all his life. And so he said that using discernment, Viveka, as an axe. So he said he kind of mentally sliced the form of the Divine Mother. The Viveka Khadga, using discernment as a sword, he cut that. And he said the moment he did that, instantly his mind soared into that transcendent being. So yes, it is the form that will lead us to the formless. It is the sound, sometimes the help of a prayer or a mantra, that will take us to beyond sound. Name will go to beyond name. So all names and forms of the divine which will help me transcend this barrier, they are all helpful, they are all wonderful. Yep.
Swami, there are a couple online questions.
Sure, yeah.
So one of them is, to perform any action in the world, a person has to take up one identity or the other. If this is a fact, how to know if we're identifying with self or non-self?
Say that again, a little loudly. Yeah.
It says, to perform any action in the world, a person has to take up one identity or the other. How do we know if we, in that identity, are identifying with the self or the non-self?
Well, any identity with anything that is limited is a non-self. But also, the way the question is worded, that we have to take up an identity, it just seems as if we have a choice about it. But actually, no. It's not like, oh, here are this menu of 10 identities. All right, I'll take up this one. We don't do like that. So we are already, and what already identified as in different ways, and that identification occurs as a result of our past karma, as a way of our thinking, our desires, our hopes, ambitions. All of these factors play a role in the identities that we acquire. But there are very few identities we acquire consciously, except perhaps we could say you're applying for a job and then as a manager somewhere. And so you know what kind of identity you will acquire if you are selected for the job. So in such limited ways, you could say, I'm choosing an identity. But most other identities, at the basic identity of a human being, I have no memory whether anybody ever came and asked me, do you want to be a human being? Do you want to be a dog or a cat? I'm just fine. I was born as a human being. So we don't have much choice in most identities, I think. Yeah.
Another question is, what is the difference between Maya and Prakriti?
Again, yeah, thank you. One of the important things we have to understand in study of Vedanta is that none of these terms is like, it's not like mathematics in the sense that Maya always means this and Prakriti always means that. They are not technical terms in those sense. No, they are technical terms, but you might find the word Prakriti being used in different books, not necessarily always meaning exactly the same thing. The word Maya too is like that. So you'll have to see the context in which the word is used to get an idea. Yes, but in some instances, the two words Maya and Prakriti are used synonymously. Okay? One more? Okay.
One last one,
Okay.
which is not an easy question. How does one attain Nirvikalpa Samadhi?
If we study this whole book till the end without missing a single class and then practice whatever it is, then it's guaranteed. Okay. So we will continue with this study next week. Next week we begin with verse 139. In fact, the next 6 verses, 139 to 44, the teacher will be answering another question of the disciple: how did the bondage arise? And you'll find some of the ideas that we discussed today might come up once again. So we will begin next week on verse 139. What I would recommend is, before we meet next week, from your copies of the book, if you can read these 6 verses by yourself and give some thought to them, then following the discussion and then the questions, etc., for next week will become even better. So that's your homework. Read the next 6 verses, try to understand them, and then we will discuss them further when we meet. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhur. So on Sunday, our subject will be fully present, fully absent. And next Wednesday, we'll continue with the study. On Saturday, we'll have the meditation as usual. So we'll conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.